My name is John Manley with Manley, Stewart & Finaldi. My firm represents 105 women that were sexually assaulted and abused by Dr. Larry Nassar. And we're here today to talk about the plea agreement and what happened in this case, why, and where we go from here. To my left is Stephen Drew, my co-counsel, and to my right is Jamie White, my other co-counsel here in Michigan. Collectively, we have 105 cases. The first thing I want to do on behalf of our clients is thank Attorney General Bill Schuette. Especially want to thank Angela Povolitis and the Michigan State Police, especially Sergeant Andrea Mumford. Without them, we would not be here today. I also want to talk about the courage of the victims that came forward and that continue to come forward to this day, most notably of late, yesterday, Gabby Douglas, who is the fourth Olympic medalist to come forward, and I suspect we'll see more. And make no mistake, this is an American tragedy. It's a tragedy not only for these women and their families and the hundreds of other women he did this to, but also for our country. Many of these victims were members of Team USA, and we failed them as a society, we failed them as a educational system, and we failed them through our criminal justice system up until today. You know, when a perpetrator who is responsible for this many rapes and molests pleads guilty, while it's viscerally satisfying to the victims, it doesn't bring back their innocence, and it doesn't bring back what they've lost. I think perhaps the most glaring thing that when I speak to our clients that upsets them is that while Dr. Nassar, I guess, accepted accountability at some level today, this situation where you have this many victims doesn't happen with a perpetrator alone. It happens when institutions whose primary job is to protect children fail them. And there are three institutions here that miserably failed children. The first is USA Gymnastics. USA Gymnastics was well aware, by their own admission, in 2015, that Dr. Nassar was a molester, and they fired him. But instead of picking up the phone and calling Michigan State and telling him they fired him, they allowed him to continue to practice for another year, and he raped and molested dozens of little girls. We believe that there was evidence much earlier than any reasonable person could have seen that Dr. Nassar was engaging in this kind of misconduct. Treating girls alone in his hotel room, that was well known to the people in charge of these women. Going into rooms at night alone, violating every policy on child protection that USA Gymnastics had, and yet no one said anything. The second is the U.S. Olympic Committee. What's stunning about the U.S. Olympic Committee is that we now have three of the most famous gymnasts, famous athletes in the world, multi-medalist, gold medalist, Allie Reisman, Michaela Maroney, who's our client, and Gabby Douglas. And the U.S. Olympic Committee has not said a word. They declined comment. Why? What are they hiding? And I would urge you, ladies and gentlemen in the press, to ask Scott Blackman at the U.S. Olympic Committee, when did the U.S. Olympic Committee know that there were allegations of misconduct against Larry Nassar? They need to answer that question. That question hasn't been answered. And the final entity that miserably failed, and arguably perhaps worse than any of the other two, is Michigan State University and its administration. You know, early in my career, I did thousands of cases against the Catholic bishops all over the country. And the standard defense was, I've been told that pedophiles are hard to detect and impossible to detect. That was the bishop's defense. Those are exactly the words of Lou Anna Simon months ago when we first started discussing about this, like, you can't detect pedophiles. But that's not true. And in fact, Michigan State didn't need to detect a pedophile. They were told about it in the 90s, in the 2000s, and repeatedly in 2014. In 2014, Michigan State knew that Dr. Larry Nassar was putting his ungloved hand into the vagina and rectums of little girls. And they told no one outside of Michigan State. They knew it was in his contract that he was treating Reisman and Gabby Douglas and Michaela Maroney. They didn't pick up the phone and call. Those molests could have been prevented if somebody had followed the law. The law is you can call the police, but you also call Child Protective Services. They didn't. They failed. And they continue to fail and continue to put out press statements that are akin to the Catholic bishops during the priest molest scandal. Things about our policies and we've changed. And then yesterday, knowing he was going to be sentenced, or day before yesterday, excuse me, they put out this whitewash report. And yet, there's a report, apparently, they paid $1 million for. $1 million of taxpayer money. But they won't release. This is a public institution. It's a public institution that is an educational institution for children. They have a report about 150 little girls being molested, and they're not going to release it? Excuse me? That is outrageous. President Simon, release the report or resign. These young women and these girls deserve justice, and they deserve to know who knew what when. And the truth is, Michigan State is hiding that information. And when institutions hide information, there's a reason. You know, Lou Anna Simon was the president of the NCAA when Penn State happened, and praised Penn State's decision to hire Louis Freeh and do an independent investigation. The only investigation of Michigan State in this case that's occurred is by their own attorneys. In my experience, your own attorneys rarely find you guilty. Enough is enough. Stop with the PR, stop with the cynical release of reports, and come clean and tell us what you knew and when you know it, and release every scrap of paper on this case. I'm now going to turn it over to Steve Drew and Jamie White.
Yes, my name is Stephen Drew, and I'm Drew Cooper and Anding. I've been involved with this case with Mr. Manley and Mr. White. The thing that struck me today, after going through the anguish that our clients have had, talking to them, how this has been affecting them, is that what he pled to today, the sexual assault he pled to today, was the same thing that in 1997, someone complained at Michigan State and said he did this same thing to me. There wasn't a difference. It's not like it was something very minor or small. And when a young lady or a young woman or a young girl comes and says, I'm feeling uncomfortable, goes to her trainers, Tiffany Thomas, I'm feeling uncomfortable, Miss Boyce, this man is putting his hands where he shouldn't be, something's wrong. And there is no accountability, there is no reporting. This, in our judgment, could have and should have, with the appropriate training, with the appropriate concern, with the appropriate protection of young ladies, should have been stopped then. Did it have to take a Rachel Den Hollander to go and finally say something to stop this when over and over at different stages of this? You heard today in the plea that the first instance of what he pled to was 1998. That's 2 decades almost of doing the same thing, putting his hands as an adult where they should not go for any reason. And we hope through this litigation to somehow make sure and effectuate change that this never, ever, ever at Michigan State happens again to any of their athletes, to any of their students, or anybody that they want to come on their campus to treat with their employees because they get a benefit from it. And part of this litigation and a lot of what we're going to be trying to do is to make sure there are policies put in place, not words, but actual implementation and things so this never, ever happens again.
Jamie White.
Thank you. I echo the comments of my colleagues. I sit here as a member of the Michigan State University community. I went to undergraduate at Michigan State University. I went to law school at Michigan State University. So for me, and I think I speak for everyone, finding justice for these young women began today to some degree. Obviously, we are seeking civil remedies, but I think I speak for everyone when I say we want Michigan State to be a leader in solving this problem. This is not a problem that's isolated to Michigan State University. Over the course of the last month, we have seen nationally politicians, celebrities, respected members of the community who have demonstrated that we live in a culture where certain behavior against women is tolerated. So obviously what Dr. Nassar did, and I have a hard time calling him Dr. Nassar anymore, what Larry did, I suppose, is outside the scope of what we've seen nationally, but I think when you look at the big picture, Michigan State can be a part of this solution. What Mr. Manley describes is hiding the information. I agree with that, and I suspect that they would say, well, we're in litigation and we can't share and so on, but I can tell you, as someone who's worked in law enforcement for almost 2 decades, there was a 2004 complaint made by someone who claimed that they were assaulted by Larry Nassar. Now, that complaint was not taken seriously, at least not seriously enough that it resulted in criminal charges. But we know that complaint was reopened in 2004. I'm sorry, it was opened last September when these allegations came forth. And we still do not have any conclusion to those allegations. We still have no charges associated with those allegations. We still do not have access to that report. Why is that? That is completely inappropriate. I've been doing this for a long time. It does not take that long to review a report from 2004 that had already been investigated. So again, I want to echo what Mr. Manley said. I think that when this comes out, there's going to be some heroes. 3 of them are sitting at this table here with me now. I think the Michigan State University Police Department has done an outstanding job. But I bifurcate that in the sense that Michigan State University has failed to live up to the standards that I believe they're capable of. And policing yourself is never, ever a good idea. I've said that since day one, and I say that again today.
Why don't we hear first from Lindsay Lemke, and we'll go down the line. How's that? Okay, sure. Lindsay, maybe share your experience when you initially approached Coach Klages and your mother approached Coach Klages about the assault that had occurred and how Coach Klages responded to you and the signing of the card and so on and so on.
And tell us your name, please, at the beginning.
Sure.
My name is Lindsay Lemke.
Spell that, please. First name.
Lindseylemke. Alright, so when this all first started coming out, the very first day that I heard about it, it was during one of our gymnastics practices. Any normal day, would have had no idea any of this was going to come about. We were taken into a separate room by someone in the Michigan State Athletic Department. I do not know her name. We were brought in there as a team with my 3 coaches, trainers as well. Everybody was involved, and we were sat down, and we were basically told that Larry Nassar was under some sort of investigation. We were not told what kind of investigation he was under. We were just told that if we were approached by any news reporters, any police officers, just anybody that was looking for information to call us or message us on anything. We were not allowed to comment on the situation. And at the time, it was very confusing at first. Like I said, none of us knew anything that was going on, and I don't think a lot of us paid attention to the fact that we were told not to say anything, because a lot of us went home and told our families right away, obviously, that something was wrong, something was up. And as things kept kind of continuing on and on, I realized what Larry had been doing to, I guess, gymnasts of all ages, that I had no idea at that point how far back it had gone. I assumed maybe it was just my friends and I in that era, only to find out after more reports came out that it was dated all the way back to 1997. And so I decided that I needed to tell my coach, Kathy Klages, about it. As I was an active member on the Michigan State gymnastics team, I figured that was the right thing to do. And when I talked to my parents about it and we made the decision, the next day I went into her office and I just described to her what happened, and that I felt like I had a right to say something, and realizing then that what he did was very wrong. And her response back to me was, before I talked to the police officer, Angela, I needed to make sure that I was doing my research to understand what was happening to me. And just in case I was asked any questions I didn't know, I didn't want to give false information to hurt Larry in any way. So basically what I took out of that is she was still defending Larry, which I thought was very sad. As an athlete of a head coach, you would expect them to support you and to help you, and you could trust them to always be there for you. I don't live very far away from Michigan State University, but had I been an athlete that lived 5+ hours away, you expect them to be your person that you trust, and she wasn't at all. And I remember going home and telling my parents about it, and I mean, they were furious, and she had told my mom the same thing, that she would even trust her daughters with Larry, trust her granddaughters still, even after all the reports came out. And to me, that was just appalling. I was expected to go to practice the same day, and I had to listen to her. I had to respect her corrections that she was giving me and take assignments from her, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because I went to her with something that was going to change my life forever, and she still defended the person who did it to me. And so it's very sad to think about the fact that you work your entire life to be a college athlete, and you sacrifice so much. And especially being a club gymnast, where I was a club gymnast, you were coached by fear, and you would leave practice in pain, and you would be scared of that, because if you knew you couldn't do gymnastics the next day, you were going to get yelled at, or you were going to have some sort of consequence as to being in pain into one of the sports that is the hardest on your body out of any sport. And so you would go to Larry, and he would be a savior to you, because you would hope that he would make you feel better so that the next day at practice you wouldn't get yelled at, and that's what you trusted him for. And the fact that he knew that, he knew John Goddard very well, and the fact that he took advantage of that, and he knew what we were going through as athletes. I mean, we told him everything, to our school drama, to gym drama, to anything, because you trusted him, and he took advantage of that. It's so sad, and it went on for so long. And as they said, reports were made in 1998, and it was blown off by so many people, including Kathy, and reports were made to her back in 1997, and I went to her with the same exact report, and she did the same thing to me. And so I just hope that all of us here today can help to make a difference, because gymnastics is a great sport, and I truly believe if you ask any little girl, they don't go to gymnastics just because it's a fun activity. They go because they love it, and they will do anything that they can do to continue doing the sport because of their passion for it. So I just hope that we can make a difference for all the little girls who are starting gymnastics, are still in gymnastics, and want to continue, and I hope that they have a better career than maybe some of us experienced growing up, because everybody deserves that.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next is Rachel Den Hollander. Go ahead, Rachel.
Good morning. Nearly 15 months ago, I made the choice to file a police report and come forward publicly about the sexual assaults Larry had perpetrated on me. Today, I am grateful for the army of women that has stopped a pedophile. I am grateful that Larry Nassar has pled guilty to the sexual assault charges with women in Ingham County. Today, we heard the truth from Larry. He committed sexual penetration on his victims. and he is guilty of first-degree criminal assault, and I am grateful that truth has been known. But today I am also very grieved, because we have yet to hear the truth from MSU and USAG and the USOC. Officials who kept Larry in power for decades. Officials who ignored repeated reports of sexual assault. Officials who brushed victims off as unable to tell the difference between a medical exam and sexual violation. For decades, MSU and USAG athletic trainers, supervisors, head coaches, and even psychologists received first-hand testimony of the sexual abuse perpetrated by Larry. Each and every time, MSU officials silenced these victims. And for decades, USAG's own policies on reporting sexual abuse created an atmosphere where predators, Larry Nassar and hundreds of USAG coaches, continued to prey on little girls, and the victims were silenced. Victims were told they were lucky to be seen by Larry. Victims were patronized and treated like uneducated females, incapable of, quote, understanding the nuanced differences between medical treatment and sexual assault. Safeguards were never instituted or enforced. Good reporting practices were never followed. Instead, Larry continued to have access to little girls for decades, and MSU officials continued to hold him up as the best of the best, to use him as a marketing tool for bringing talented athletes to their program and paying medical patients into the school. And this continued until the day I came forward. When I came forward with my police report, Dean William Strample, the head of MSU's College of Osteopathy, the man who was involved in clearing Larry of sexual assault allegations only 2 years prior, sent emails and told Larry, good luck, I'm on your side. When my video testimony with the Indy Star came out, Dean William Strample sent an email to the MSU provost and mocked my testimony and made a joke of it. Quote, cherry on the cake of my day. This is how sexual assault has been handled at MSU. This is how victims are treated, and it breaks my heart. We were silenced, we were mocked, and our abuser was told time and time again, I'm on your side. Today stands as a stark and painful reminder that while my predator has been stopped, the culture that allowed this predator to continue abusing has yet to end. I find it cruelly ironic that in the same week my abuser pleads guilty to sexual assault, Dean William Strample, my abuser's enabler, is honored for his contributions to the College of Osteopathy. While MSU has been absolutely silent on the role Dean Strample played in keeping a pedophile in power, they were quick to put up a webpage acknowledging his recent accolades, noting his, quote, outstanding past and present contributions. Allowing the sexual assault of over 140 women and little girls is apparently of no consequence to MSU. And just recently, MSU spokesperson Jason Cody defended MSU's 2014 investigation that cleared Larry of sexual assault charges, in which a victim was patronizingly told she, quote, didn't understand the nuanced differences between a medical exam and sexual assault. Cody said he, quote, doesn't necessarily agree that MSU made any mistakes in that investigation. So this morning I have a message for MSU. Your words of care and concern ring hollow, and I do not want to hear them any longer until they are backed up by your actions. My greatest hope, and the hope of every sexual assault victim, is that when they come forward, their voices will matter, and they will be protected, and they will be cared for. And exactly the opposite happened. My greatest hope as a victim and as a mother was to finally see someone in authority demonstrate true leadership by taking responsibility for failures, by telling the truth and striving to do better. We are more than a year from my police report. Our abuser has pled guilty, but MSU, USAG, and USOC, you have yet to take responsibility for what happened on your watch. To the leadership of these organizations and at MSU, you repeatedly claim that abuse has no place on campus, but you have failed to hold anyone accountable for allowing a pedophile to flourish for decades. You claim you are deeply sorry for what we have gone through, but you have not listened to one word we have said. I could fill pages listing the things that MSU and USAG could have done differently. In fact, I have, and so have many other brave women. And you have turned a deaf ear to everything we have said. You speak of transparency and accountability, but refuse to release your internal investigation into Larry Nassar. You tell your board it is virtually impossible to stop a pedophile. It is abundantly clear what sexual assault really means at MSU. MSU, you reserve strong words for rival schools like Penn State, but keep silent when the cover-up is in your own house. You applaud victims for speaking out, but you put a pedophile in such a position of prominence that the only way to stop him was to release every scrap of privacy I had. You have no understanding, not only of the devastation of sexual assault that I and so many other women went through, that you could have prevented had you listened to that first report in 1997, but also no understanding of the incredible cost of being forced to speak publicly because of the position of power you put Larry in. Today is a stark reminder to me, and it is painful, to know that while justice is coming for my abuser, we the victims had to stand alone. We had to fight with everything in us to be heard. We were not protected, we were not cared for, and we did not matter. And we still do not. So long as this is the case, MSU and USAG and USOC, so long as you are unable to acknowledge your past failures and the devastating consequences that those failures had for so many little girls, you will continue to be an unsafe place for children. We will never see a change in sexual assault until we change the culture that surrounds the abuser and that surrounds the victims. MSU and USAG and USOC, this needs to start with you.
Thank you, Rachel. Our next speaker will be Kaylee Lorenz. Kaylee, you're 18? And as a survivor of Larry Nassar, why don't we move the mics, yeah. And her mother will speak after that. And this is the first time Kaylee's spoken publicly. Kelly, go ahead.
Up until this moment, I have been known as Jane Doe E, and I no longer want to wear this mask. The reason that I decided to speak publicly is about my sexual assault by Larry Nassar. I am tired of being labeled as Jane Doe. This didn't happen to Jane Doe. This happened to me, Kaylee Lorenz, and I'm using today to start a new chapter in my life and move on. I was sexually assaulted by Larry Nassar shortly after my 13th birthday, and it was a dark secret until I put the pieces together last September. Even though I told my parents a little bit about it the day that it had happened, I didn't really realize the impact that it had on me until I finally reported it to Michigan State University Police and heard myself telling the story. As I try to put the pieces of my life together, I'm trying to understand how I was ever seen by Larry Nassar, since there had been so many reports made to different people at MSU and to USA Gymnastics. It makes me angry and upset that Michigan State didn't do a better job of protecting me. How could they let this happen to me and so many other young girls and women? Last year was my senior year of high school, and as it came time to decide on a college, my first choice was always Michigan State. I wanted to go there since I was a little girl, from watching Big Ten gymnastics and from hearing people say how great it was to go there. But how could I go to a university that betrayed me? I would always be reminded of the sexual assault that happened to me on their campus. This made such a difference in my life that I have changed my major to criminal justice so I can have a voice for those who are afraid to or can't speak up. I would like to thank Rachel for being brave enough to be the first voice of Larry Nassar's victims. Rachel would be the reason for me having the courage to sit here and speak today. Second, I would like to thank Michaela Maroney and Allie Raisman for putting people's judgments aside and telling their personal experiences with Larry Nassar. I feel that it has helped us get to where we are today. Justice for Larry Nassar's victims. Lastly, I want to thank my parents for being my support system and my shoulder to cry on through the hard days these last 14 months. I'm deciding today to try to put this behind me and to focus on creating change. I let Larry Nassar take over my life for too long. I'm hoping that me telling my story will encourage any young girl or woman to come forward, and it's never late to start healing. Thank you.
Lisa Lorenz is Kaylee's mom, and it's Lorenz.
Close.
Okay.
It was so close.
All right, go ahead.
Lorinz.
Okay.
I apologize for reading this, but it's been a long, emotional 14 months and days, so that's what I'm going to do, so I'm sorry. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank some pretty incredible people that we've come in contact with over the 14 months. Not only because of the difficult jobs that they do day in and day out, but for the way that they do their jobs. First, I'd like to thank Detective Amy Ray, which is actually who Kaylee reported to first, and Detective Angela Mumford for enabling Kaylee to tell her story. Reporting her sexual assault was never a question for her, but she was afraid nonetheless. These detectives made sure that they were always there for Kaylee at any point in time. Detective Mumford is one of the very few people with whom Kaylee will talk about the difficult times that she's had because of the assault by Larry Nassar. I'd also like to thank Assistant Attorney General Angie Povolitis and Assistant Attorney General Robin Liddell for their sensitivity, thoughtfulness, hard work, and dedication. I want to thank John Manley because he was the first person who would actually listen to me. I had tried to report and it went nowhere. He was also the only other person that Kaylee will talk to about what's happened to her. Kaylee entered our lives a little over 18 years ago, and I can remember rocking her and holding her tight, and I wondered what wonderful things life would have in store for her. What career path would she choose? What college would she go to? Who would she marry? How many kids would she have? Never once could I have imagined that her path would be forever altered in August of 2012. We put Kaylee in gymnastics at the age of 3 to develop her confidence and to prepare her athletically for whatever it is she might want to do later in life. She competed under the USAG umbrella until she left the sport as a level 7 gymnast. It was disappointing for Kaylee on many levels because she had always hoped to compete at the college level, specifically at Michigan State University. Larry Nassar put an end to both of those dreams. In August of 2012, Kaylee's dad took her to see Larry for the 3rd time. This time, however, instead of coming home and reporting to me the exciting stories he had shared with her, she came home upset and withdrawn. When I asked her how it went, she told me that Dr. Nassar had done something that made her feel uncomfortable. I won't go into the specific details of what she told me at that time, but I will always remember that moment. I remember trying to process what she was telling me, but it just didn't seem to fit anywhere in the logical scheme of things. And there was this horrible feeling that came over me that was completely indescribable. I told myself that there had to be a medical reason. Was this sexual assault? Who do I tell? Who would even believe me? This, after all, was Larry Nassar. We didn't discuss the details of that appointment again until September of last year. Kaylee had sent me the press release that Nassar had been accused of sexual assault. Immediately, that horrific, gut-wrenching feeling returned. Although we hadn't talked about it, I had never forgotten. You don't forget that. The following day, I asked her about that appointment, and 14 months later, here we are. There have been many tears, many fears, and many moments of incredible strength during these months. Larry Nassar has pled guilty to sexually assaulting my daughter and all of these other women and girls. So you would think that that would be enough, but it isn't. I have questions. I have questions for Michigan State University, USA Gymnastics, and the USOC. Had any one of these organizations done their job, then Kaylee would have never met Larry Nassar, let alone have been sexually assaulted by him. He would have been fired long before 2011 when Kaylee had her first appointment. They knew, they covered it up, and they are equally responsible for Kaylee's assault. Any person that had any knowledge of any athlete being touched improperly or who felt uncomfortable with Nassar's methods is responsible for Kaylee's assault. Michigan State University has a responsibility to put our children first and to hold those accountable who knew about the abuse and or those who covered up these assaults. How is it that a scandal of this magnitude with hundreds and hundreds of victims could occur on MSU's campus and no one knew? Where are the consequences for the victims? Excuse me. The victims of Larry Nassar deserve to know who knew what and when. They also deserve to hear more than idle promises of what they will do moving forward. It's not okay to merely release blanket press statements and think that that's enough. I'm asking MSU to make a loud and clear statement that sexual assault on their campus will not be tolerated by making an example out of those who knew. Only then will I believe that they are truly going to make significant change. Michigan State University Board of Trustees should expect the same. Who knows, August of 2012 was my daughter, the next one could be yours or theirs. If we don't demand change and accountability, then we are just part of the problem. I'm wondering what's going to happen to ensure that those who don't report run a risk greater than money. Jail time? Senator Feinstein out of California is leading the charge for change, but what about our senators? For months I have been trying to reach out to Senator Stabenow with no success. Within the past 2 weeks, I actually called and left messages for both Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters, detailed messages, and asked them to join me in promoting change and demanding accountability. I have yet to hear from either one of them. I started off by thanking some amazing people. Most importantly, however, I want to thank my daughter Kaylee for demonstrating courage and strength beyond her years, and to tell her how incredibly proud I am of her. Living through this nightmare was bad enough, but when you make the decision to report, you have no idea exactly what's ahead of you. Kaylee had to relive the details of her assault over and over again. Not only did she have to keep retelling her story, but with every article or press release, it was like she was being assaulted over and over again. We had some very difficult days, and I always told Kaylee that she could change her mind at any time, but she was determined to see justice and to have a voice. Reporting is incredibly difficult because our justice system just does not do enough to protect our young victims. I was appalled that the court was not closed in Ingham County for the pretrial hearings. I was even more disheartened that the defense attorney thought it was okay to try to intimidate my daughter by disclosing personal details about her that would make it easy for those in the gymnastics world or in our own community to be able to identify her. This, however, backfired, and Kaylee's resilience took over. There needs to be change, significant change, so that minor victims are comfortable reporting, and that those who fail to report or cover up abuse pay the ultimate price. Only then will we see real change. I invite Senators Stabenow and Peters to join me in this endeavor. Together, we can make it difficult for institutions like Michigan State University and USA Gymnastics to use money and power to squash the voices of these young victims. Kaylee no longer allows me to wreck her, and I no longer wonder about where she will go to school. She's found a little college in Southwest Michigan that's the perfect place for her to spend 3.5 more years, and I'm excited to take that journey with her. I now know the beginning of her journey, and the future looks bright because she is one incredible young woman, and I am so proud to be her mom.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, we'll now take questions for both the lawyers and the victims.
Can we move the mics?
Sure.
Okay.
want to do the lawyers first and then the survivors?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Usually when the survivors first, that way you wouldn't have to
Yeah.
lose mics. But oh well.
Oh, yeah.
It's on me, not you.
Yes, Alicia,
Yeah.
Alicia, put us back.
Okay. Any questions of the attorneys?
Yeah, let me start with, if you don't mind, Mr. Manley. You refer to this internal investigation that they haven't released. Have you started your litigation? Are you able to get that through discovery at some point?
So at this point, there's a stay on the litigation until December. But they've already said publicly that they believe that's attorney-client privilege material. So absent them releasing it, it probably won't be. The same lawyers who are litigating the case for Michigan State, which is Skadden Arps, Slate and Flown, out of Chicago, are the same lawyers that did the investigation. So, you know, when you're in litigation and you hire a lawyer to defend you, and then you hire that lawyer to investigate you, we all know what the result is. But the fact that they won't disclose it, in my experience, tells you a lot. You know, the only way this sexual assault of children is always a crime done in secret. It flourishes in secrecy. Institutions that have this problem have a culture of secrecy. And clearly Michigan State has a culture of secrecy, and they don't get it. You know, if you want to stop this, come clean. Fix what happened, get rid of those who did it, and move forward. And instead, what you're getting is stonewalling. That is not acceptable. It's not acceptable for one victim, let alone hundreds. Next question.
You've mentioned a desire to have some sort of independent entity investigate the university. Their own police department is an independent. Attorney General Bill Schuette's implied or indicated that he probably won't. Who do you think should conduct this investigation?
Well, I think there needs to be, you know, a number of things that, a number of entities that should investigate. One is, you know, what we know is that there was a report to USA Gymnastics in July of 2015. And that report was never conveyed. And you have dozens of little girls molested in that time period. That's one. You know, why isn't USA Gymnastics being investigated if they're not reporting? In Michigan, in Indianapolis, where USA Gymnastics is based, and in Texas, where the Caroli Ranch is, where the original report was made, all of those states have mandatory reporting laws. And the law is, you pick up the phone and you call Child Protective Services and you file a report. So no one did that. And if Child Protective Services had been notified, this probably would have stopped. It should have been notified in 1998. So I actually would appeal to the Attorney General to reconsider whether or not to investigate. I would suggest that, given the interstate nature of these crimes, that it would be appropriate for an FBI task force to investigate this. And I would also suggest that you hire somebody outside the university, that somebody that frankly, somebody outside the university system picks, maybe the Attorney General picks, to do an independent investigation that's not funded by Michigan State, but funded by a different source. I mean, what we found in Penn State when that happened is that the president, I believe the provost and the athletic director were all indicted. And their conduct was certainly assailed. Here, everybody involved with this, everybody involved in the cover-up, everybody involved in the 2014 total failure and concealment of what he did is not only been retained, but some have been given new contracts. And that's important not only because it's wrong and it's morally wrong and it's just poor leadership on behalf of the president of the university, but what message does that send to other people who would cover up abuse at Michigan State? It sends the message that if you play ball and you put the institution first rather than the victim, we're going to protect you. That's the wrong message.
Are there any other specific people at MSU you have concerns about? We've heard Larry Nassar, we've heard Kathy Plagas, we've heard Dean Schrampel, we've heard Luann Simon.
Well, look, I have concerns about a lot of things at Michigan State, but I we've never been given the documents, either in litigation or anywhere else, to show who knew what when. So based on the limited facts we know and based on the limited investigation we've done, largely because of the good work of you folks in the press, through FOIA requests and others, we do have some idea of what occurred. But, you know, the people who know this are Michigan State. For example, in 2014, no one looked at his computer. If anybody had picked up his computer and done what you would normally do and say, okay, we're just going to search, they'd have found child pornography. They'd have found all the stuff that indicated he had prurient interest in children. You know, they knew he was putting his ungloved hand into a child's vagina. What else do you need to know if you're a right-thinking person? Red alert, stop. Who else knows this? They didn't do that. They just put him right back into the, you know, into the room, and he consumed children. They didn't pick up the phone and call USA Gymnastics and say, hey, we suspended him, by the way. They let him go to camp while he was supposedly suspended at Michigan State. So, you know, I think there's a lot of people that need to be accountable, but we need to have someone outside the university look into that and tell us who that is beyond, obviously, William Strample. The fact that Dr. Strample is still at that school is just a punch in the eye to these victims. How do you explain that to somebody, the parent of a child who's molested after 2014? It's inexplicable. How do you justify it? I mean, he knew he was violating their own protocol. Their own protocol said you must use a gloved hand. You know, it's a mucous membrane. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. You don't need to be a medical professional to know that. Instead, they appoint people who investigate him, who are essentially his friends, and they say, okay, we'll use a glove next time. And of course, nobody enforced that. And he went right on doing what he was doing. Wrong. Vile, to use the judge's words. Gross. Inept. These are the words to describe that conduct. I can't come up with all of them. But worst of all, you have little girls lying in his wake that never should have met him. And for that, the university needs to answer. And they had an opportunity here to make this right. They had an opportunity, instead of being Penn State, to make this them a beacon of how to handle this, and they've blown it. It's too late. You can't fix this now. You can't fix it. It's too much time has gone by. And you can put out all the press statements in the world, and you know that's equivalent to Larry Nassar saying, you know, I pray the rosary for these victims. Too little, too late. You know, talk is cheap. Enough. Sorry. Next question.
Educate me just a little bit. Do you represent the victims also in the civil matters, and what does today's plea do for that civil case?
So, yeah, I represent 6 plaintiffs in California and around 100 here in Michigan. So what the two pleas do is establish, child pornography plea established essentially that he had a sexual interest in children. This plea today unequivocally states that he did what he's accused of doing. And he pleads to it in a number of cases. Those pleas are admissible. He also waived any defense he had that this was a legitimate medical procedure. Frankly, the USA Gymnastics, and to a lesser extent Michigan State, has sort of implied and never made the statement that this was not an appropriate medical procedure. There was a lot of sort of waffling on that. We're very sorry, but you know, and I mean, I can tell you, USA Gymnastics has, you know, initially actively asserted that this could have been medical treatment. We're just not sure. Today closes the door on that argument. And it says it was sexual assault, it is sexual assault, it always was sexual assault, this was not medical treatment, it was never medical treatment, and he admits it. And to use the judge's word, he violated these women in, quote, the vilest way possible. So, I mean, and the defendants have a choice in this case, and they have a choice to accept responsibility and accountability and make change and make this right, or they can go the way of the Catholic bishops and fight and fight and fight and see their institutions destroyed. It's one or the other.
Sorry, that same question goes for each of you as well. Do you want to start?
You know, I would just echo what John said as far as any sort of misunderstanding. You know, what's been very frustrating to all of the young women that I've worked with is you know, when they were being assaulted, they were very young girls. And understandably so, they were told it was medical treatment. They were told Larry Nassar was the person that could fix them. They were very motivated to be in gymnastics. And so there has been some debate. While it's become more limited over time, there has been some debate. We've heard victims that we know now are victims come forward and say that no, what Larry did to me was okay, and I believe it was medical treatment. So I think that today's plea, I think, brings some closure for these young women that have been assaulted, in that now they know. They've always known, but there's no question at this point in time that his behavior was illegal and selfish.
The other thing this plea does is that it identified that it was not with the consent of them. Well, obviously they were minors and were young girls. But part of that criminal case, and the reason you have higher penalties sometimes is when you're in a position of authority. This man used, not doctor, used his position of authority, used that to gain the trust of these young ladies. These young ladies hurt. Gymnastics, causes pain sometimes, and all they wanted to do was to get help for that pain to go away so that they could keep competing in the sport they love. He used that. He also used the fact that he was the good guy, where the coaches would be tough. He would come and say, I'm the one that's going to help you. All of that trust that you build as a young child, and I don't know about any of you, but I'm still afraid of spiders from something I saw when I was 5 years old with The Amazing Shrinking Man. When I saw it for a quarter, that's how old I am, at the East Town Theater, and this tarantula got after him. When things happen to you as a child, it stays in your memory. And the more trust you build in someone, when that trust is taken away, the innocence just gets destroyed. Some are having problems with relationships with men because the first man to touch them sexually was this man who assaulted them. So not to recognize that, and when someone comes to you and says that and you're a child, how you cannot take that seriously and say, oh, he's just the Olympic doctor, that's a failure. And it's a failure that's got to be corrected. And Me Too, Rachel was Me One before Me Too even became popular, and that courage is why we're here today. I'm just so thankful to that lady.
John, today Larry Nassar did plead to 7 counts. However, the judge did say at the sentencing, all of the 125 victims who did come forward to MSU could write letters or even make statements. What does that suggest? Because he technically only pleaded to 7, but the rest can make statements.
So they agreed to plead to the 7 and waive them, but it's common practice in any state with a victim's bill of rights that anybody that he was accused of can speak, and the judge can consider their statements at sentencing in terms of mitigation or aggravation of the conduct. In terms of what it's going to look like, I've seen this a couple of times before in mass tort sexual abuse cases. I anticipate he and Michigan State and USA Gymnastics and the U.S. Olympic Committee are going to hear from these women and girls and their families and hear the depth of suffering that's been imposed by their conduct. I hope the country hears it. People need to know that that this hurts, and it's not just, you don't just get over it. Some people hurt for the rest of their lives, some people hurt not as much, it varies, but it hurts. And the judge said, I thought very well, I mean, I've not agreed with Judge Aquilina on everything in this case, especially the gag order. We actually sued her in federal court, but I give her, and nobody said this today, I give her tremendous credit for what she did today. Because when he made that statement, she didn't let him get away with it. And she said, you're hurting people. And she also said, this is an epidemic. And I can tell you, this is all I do. The fact that there's a lawyer and multiple lawyers in this country and there's enough of this that we are busy full-time with it tells you this is a public health crisis, not only in Michigan, but throughout the country. And there are many Larry Nassars that are out there, many. And the only thing that stands between them and the abyss for these kids is people who are willing to stand up and say, not okay. And really, that's what that's what you're going to hear at that hearing is what happens when you don't say stop.
I have some questions for the lady.
Okay, any other questions for the lawyers? We'll switch to the. Okay, sure. Okay, go ahead. Let's go ahead and switch the please.
Cool, great. This question is really for all three of you. Can you verbally describe what you were thinking when you heard Mr. Nassar apologize or attempt to apologize?
I honestly think he did that to make himself feel better. I mean, I'm sure he wants healing and this and that because he does feel guilty about what he did. But to me, it doesn't mean anything. The fact that he just thinks, oh, I pleaded guilty and now you guys can start healing is ridiculous to me. I don't think he truly understands how many people are hurting and how bad people are hurting over this. I mean, as it was described, you remember this for the rest of your life. I mean, it's going to, not being a mom yet and wanting to have kids, it already frightens me having to hopefully not describe fully what happened to me, but let them know that there are people out there like that, and unfortunately I was a victim of it, and it is something that affects you for the rest of your life. And for him to just say, I pray on the rosary, and it's unbelievable to me, and it's disgusting because he just thinks that saying sorry, not even turning towards us and being able to say it to our face is acceptable. It's not. It doesn't do anything.
I think it really, excuse me, I think it really demonstrated the psychological state Larry's in. He's a consummate narcissist. He is a master manipulator. Those are both qualities that you typically see with pedophiles, particularly pedophiles. They're very prevalent. And he is a master manipulator. I don't believe there was anything sincere in what Larry said, other than his desire to refocus the attention on the good he believed he did today by allowing the community to move forward. He's a very victim-oriented predator. And again, a lot of these are warning signs psychologically that MSU and USAG missed. A lot of Larry's behavior, a lot of his personalities, they fit the profile of a predator perfectly. And so to have Dean William Strample and Kathy Pelagius and officials at USAG and MSU repeatedly missing these warning signs, repeatedly uneducated about what a predator and a pedophile looks like, is extremely distressing to me and heartbreaking. I don't see anything in Larry's statements today other than a continued glimpse into his manipulative and narcissistic behavior.
Excuse me. I completely agree with everything that they both said. I think my jaw almost hit the floor. I thought it was very manipulative, and I don't really believe it was 100% sincere from him. And yeah, he's stuck in jail and, he has to live with that, but I do not think it was sincere. I think him telling us to, move on and that we should heal and there's a healing process. Yeah, there is, but I just don't think it was 100% sincere from him.
Next question.
The lawyers mentioned that they thought that the state should look into Michigan State criminally. Do you guys feel the same way, that they should be held criminally responsible for that?
Absolutely. I mean, the culture of enabling is absolutely vital to why pedophiles flourish. You don't get someone like Larry Nassar, you don't get a pedophile who is able to abuse without there being a culture surrounding him, putting him in that place. And until we deal with the enablers, this is going to continue happening. Until you deal with why he was able to continue preying on little girls, we're going to see this same cycle repeating over and over. The difficulty is that we typically have very weak laws when it comes to dealing with enablers. And so that is something I really think that the Michigan legislature needs to take very seriously. We have an international scandal here in Michigan involving one of our most prominent universities, and we need to be looking at some of the reasons that Michigan State isn't being held accountable for what they did. Some of the difficulty is the statute of limitations for the mandatory reporting laws. Who is covered under those mandatory reporting laws? That's something that the legislature needs to deal with, and they need to do it quickly.
I have a question for Rachel. There are presumably other victims out there who are in your position. No one has come forward. Looking back on the past year plus, what should they know?
I'm sorry, could you, about what specifically?
Just about your experience, whether, what would you tell them if someone came to you asking whether they should come forward against their abuser?
I think that's a really hard question to answer because it is important. It is worth the cost, but it is extremely painful. There is a significant cost to speaking up. You can essentially count on the community that surrounds the abuser, and oftentimes that means the community that you're also a part of turning on you. Again, you saw this with both USAG and MSU. The things that were said about the work to me and the women that were speaking up by officials at MSU, by officials at USAG were quite horrific. Some of the worst things came from the people that should have been protecting us the most. And so I think victims need to be aware of that dynamic so that they are prepared for it. But they need to know that no one can take the truth from them. And what they are saying is the truth, and it doesn't matter what the defense attorneys say. It does not matter what MSU officials say. It does not matter what anyone says. They know what the truth is, and no one can change that. And to be able to hold to that.
I have a question on the number of victims. The Attorney General did say that they wouldn't come forward with 125 victims. You represent 140 in a civil suit. More than 100 victims have complained to MSU. How much overlap is there? Because we keep calling it dozens,
Yeah,
at least
so-
in our case. So is it hundreds, or, I mean, how much overlap is there?
So we represent 105.
105.
There's 125 that have reported to Michigan State Police. There's some that have not reported. For example, not all the California victims reported to Michigan State because they weren't abused in California. I can tell you that, Allie Reisman, Gabby Douglas, and Michaela Maroney have not talked to the Michigan State Police. They talked to the FBI. I think the same is true of Jamie Dancher. So I think the number of victims is between 150 and 160, and we continue to get calls. The one thing I didn't state that I wanted to add is that we're now seeing Michigan State calling employer, having retired FBI agents calling employers and investigating victims, which is precisely what the Catholic bishops did as well, and I think that's important to note. I also want to mention Jamie Dancher, who was the second person to report, who's an Olympic bronze medalist, and she was savaged in the press as well. So I didn't mention that before, but I wanted to get that in. Other questions for this?
John, can I just add one point to that comment about Kim? To what extent this goes anywhere, I think it's notable that at the preliminary examination that took place in Ingham County, it was played in the open courtroom. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may not have seen it, but Larry Nassar, when being interviewed by Andrea Mumford, told her in no uncertain terms that he had committed this act thousands of times. And he did that in the context of defending himself at that point in time. But by his own words, we know that he's done this thousands of times. So as far as specifically people that are involved in litigation and prosecution, those numbers are ascertainable. But I don't know that we'll ever know the depth of harm that he's caused. People have chosen to not come forward for their own personal reasons, and that's understandable. But I think the numbers are astronomical if we could ever get to the bottom of it.
I believe it's likely he did this every day.
I also wanted to echo something that Lisa Lorenz said about not being return phone calls, not being from senators. And the lack of interest and the lack of statements by public officials in this, with the notable exception of being Bill Schuette, who's been amazing, is stunning. What are they afraid of? For God's sakes, these are young girls. Your job as an elected official is to protect the public. Speak up and do the right thing, public officials. Speak for these women. Nelson Mandela said that you could judge a society's soul by the way it treats its children. And we're not doing very well. Any other questions of the survivors?
Yeah, for the three of you, and his apology rang a little bit hollow, you said, but did hearing him admit guilt and actually say the words guilty out loud provide any vindication there?
Yeah, for me, it provided closure. Some sort, anyway. Not all the way, but some.
I think it was an important step. I mean, when I came forward, I really had to make the determination that I didn't need a guilty verdict because I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I have not been banking on that. I have not been counting on that because the truth needed to come out no matter what. And so I think I had reached a point before then where no matter what happened, I knew what was true. But to hear him have to say that and to have to acknowledge it publicly, I think was a very good thing societally. I think it was a very good thing for all of us to have him have to stand up and take responsibility for what he did. And I do hope that will provide significant closure and significant clarity as well.
I think that it helps with the healing process and to help move on. And yes, it was hard to hear that, yes, he is guilty to sexually assaulting the three of us. And it's very hard to hear it, but it definitely does help with starting that new chapter and moving on and trying to not necessarily forget about it, but to put it behind us.
I think that'll be it. The ladies will be available for, the women will be available for individual interviews if nobody wants to talk with them individually as well as counsel. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thanks, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen.